Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Our event is all about unlocking executive leadership through the trust economy. There is no question that the biggest issue in the world today is trust. Whether we look at this geopolitically, whether we look at this from a business perspective, or whether or not we look at this as an everyday event, one of the issues is trust. It has eroded greatly over the last 10 years plus, and there are events that take place about that. You know, there are bigger challenges, bigger obstacles that each and every one of us in this room and the world have to deal with on an ongoing basis, and that requires change, requires transformation, and actually requires a different set of playbooks in order to not just navigate, but actually to take the people on that journey to safer waters. It requires business resiliency. It requires bigger and better risk management. It requires board of directors to actually start looking fundamentally at what's going on a 24/7, 7-day basis, and not once a month. So, further ado, I think it was the famous Tom Peters that said, trust is the issue of the decade, not technology. Even more fascinating was the Gallup report. I had Mark, our business partner in the US, on the phone for hours discussing this report. Why? Well, only the Gallup Global Workplace Report said there's only 23%, right, of people, okay, in the world being productive. This leaves a hole of $8.8 trillion, which is on average about 11% of GDP, which is bigger than Amazon, Apple, and Google's turnover all put together. We should be worried. We have got something to be worried about.
What we've seen with companies who understand their contribution is that the employees understand the contribution that they're making. I'm not talking vision and mission. We've seen that the engagement with those things really drop off. But contribution and personality, everybody can relate to that. And actually, when you understand it yourself and what that company does and that brand does in a wider sense, the customer then understands it and other people understand it. And that starts to become the story of trust. Now, some people challenge me on that and say, well, you're just talking about purpose. Well, Darth Vader had a purpose, but he didn't contribute a lot to society. So that's my response to that one.
Right now, we can't recruit people in the United States military. The Army missed its mission by 23,000 people last year. The Navy missed it by 10,000. The Air Force missed it by 12,000. And we in the Army were offering a $50,000 sign-up bonus and still couldn't get people to sign up. That's trust. That's what that is all about. It's that glue that holds everything together. And when it's gone, it takes a long time to get it back. It isn't easy to build back that trust. When I talk to people about trust, I talk about a 360-degree trust. Because it isn't just one way. It certainly is the leader. The people that you lead have to trust the leader. That's guaranteed. That has to happen or nothing else goes on. But also the leader has to trust the people that you lead. That's what allows that leader-led relationship to happen. If that relationship isn't there, then there's no way you can lead people, at least not efficiently and effective. But then it's also the other piece of that a lot of us forget is it's about the people who work in your organization have to trust each other. Vince Lombardi, who was arguably, and I would say not even arguably, he was the greatest American football coach that ever coached. And he always used to say that a team is not a group of people who play together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. Because it all comes down to that. Even on a playing field, it doesn't matter. Pick a profession. It doesn't matter. You have to have that trust.
The philosophy of experience and wisdom and trust is the bedrock of leadership. And you could arguably say that there's no executive I can think of that can tick the box on every single one of those. especially the top half of the box. Let me give an example. So you take someone like Steve Jobs. He was a visionary for Apple, and he did fantastic things. But Tim Cook, who's got a PhD in process management, is now the CEO of Apple, is what I would call a strong integrator. And so you look at those slightly different skill sets in terms of what they do. The anomaly is probably Elon Musk, who's probably good at both of those, and that's why he's the wealthiest man in the world. But it is very rare to find someone, again, who can tick all the boxes. But what is important, I think, as we look at executive leadership and leadership in general, is the bottom half of that in terms of the people, skills, and values that we need to live by. And I think it's that wisdom, and I was experimenting the other day, Dan, you'll be intrigued in this in terms of the power of AI, and we know AI is massive hype right now, and technology in terms of I was playing around with an avatar who instead of going the expensive route, and Rodrigo and David, I don't want to take you out of business, but there's an avatar that actually does it all now for you. Where you want to do your digital marketing, you just type in the text and you choose your avatar and pay for an avatar, and it does it all for you, and it produces a wonderful marketing video. And so for me, when we look at the world that we're facing right now, it does come back to this thing that says, yes, technology is important. It is exciting. We must be curious about it. But I think we must never underestimate the importance of human interaction, of the ability to just have a conversation, the ability to walk down the corridor and somebody greets you, instead of looking at your iPhone, you actually put your iPhone away and have a conversation.
I have a problem quite often on phone calls now that people talk across me. And the reason they're talking across me is because I've actually been listening to what someone else on the phone call has said, and I'm not immediately jumping in. If you really listen to people, and I mean listening not just with your ears, but with your eyes and every cell in the body, and you feel the dynamic of what's happening, you'll really understand what they're trying to communicate. Because we often think of just words as a communication, but that's not the case. We actually communicate with everything, which is why it's much better if you can, to be on visual, if you're doing a call. But regardless, use all your senses to actually listen. But if you're doing that, you then normally naturally take a moment to reflect, and then you reply. Most people are already busy thinking about what they're going to say back to you while you're still talking to them, and the reply comes straight back to you. So if you have a conversation with people that are all listening, you'll find that there are pauses in the conversation, and people get used to that because they respect the fact that you've listened to what they've said, and now you're going to digest that for a second, and then you'll say the next thing. If you're in table tennis going backwards and forwards, it means both of you are just talking over each other, and you get to the end of the conversation and you realize you haven't really engaged. And part of the problem about trust at the moment, apart from bad leadership examples and maybe even bad leadership candidates. I mean, I remember in recent elections for the US and UK thinking, I wouldn't want either of those candidates. We seem to be slightly stuck for choices, millions of people, and yet no one really stepping up to lead, is you need to be careful about communicating very clearly and carefully what you're actually going to do, and you need to deliver on it. So learning to listen and being much more mindful about how we communicate are really important, and they're really important in the boardroom as well. The boardroom is a slightly unusual environment compared to most places. Most places you've got a very natural hierarchy, certainly in the army, but also normally in business there's a boss, and then there's a very sort of staggered hierarchy of who gets to suggest things and everyone else saying yes. The boardroom is much more of a collegiate environment. It's much more of an Arthurian round table where a good chair will make sure that everyone participates in the conversation. So you can have a very different dynamic about conversation when you're all feeling as if you're equals within a room. And it's really important that you recognize that, and also that you own the fact that to change our society, to change our trust problem, all of us are going to have to step up to the plate a little bit more and start to lead.
The decline in trust of my profession over my career, it's not all down to me, but during my career has been almost incredible. And it's been a real challenge. And it's something that we've all spoken about. Trust is something you lose instantly, but it takes a very long time to rebuild it if you possibly can rebuild it. So I just wanted to talk to you about the challenges around trust that we face with our lawyers. We're a firm now with about 1,200 people, nearly 200 partners. and also the challenges that we face from our clients. And as Dan says, how are we going to deal with this going forward? How are we as a firm going to continue our growth and profitability and differentiate ourselves from the competition, given the changing demands of clients and lawyers? We have seen a massive change in the attitude of the Gen Zs and our younger cohorts in the firm. And it was all connected. We were on a journey, as Geoff referred to. Over the last 10 years, I think we've seen a sea change. But the real change that I believe, affected us was the pandemic. There is the pre-pandemic world and there is the post-pandemic world for us. Because what happened during the pandemic was that, quite rightly, we developed a national obsession with health and well-being. Quite right, because we were all threatened with death at the very worst. So we needed to trust our government to protect us. They did that through lockdown and various measures. As we came out of lockdown, that expectation of trust about looking after people's health and well-being transferred onto employers. So our lawyers, whether directly or subconsciously, are saying to us, how are you, Julian? How are you, Freeths, going to protect my health and safety? How are you going to create a working environment where I don't feel uncomfortable or threatened? And whilst that started with physical well-being, it's really continued into mental health and well-being. And to be honest, I think we are still in the midst of a massive social experiment. We still don't know really what the outcome of all these impacts is going to be. For sure, a massive impact is going to be well-being. But fundamental to it all, I think, is that people's attitude to work and the work environment has shifted forever.
We must create an environment that's safe for all our employees and their well-being. In order to do that, we need to put human-centered design at the very center of all of our design patterns or culture canvases. It's all well and good having defined processes, but if people do not feel safe in their environment, then what's the point? So we might as well cancel culture if we're not going to create a psychologically safety and an environment to actually excel within.
I've seen it in my own life where I've seen the most underperforming people, and when you just understand what causes them to be underperforming, and you start to understand actually they're battling in their own life, and you give them those support structures, you unlock the fire in their heart. And I've seen it, and it's so amazing when you see someone who's battling and you can see it in their body language, their demeanor, and you can intervene and you can change and help them in those circumstances, and they become a better performer. And I think for me it's about how do we as leaders and organizations allow for that openness of sharing to say, I'm going to share something very personal, very courageous, and I need help. And I think it's also how as leaders we create that environment of authenticity and openness to allow that sharing to happen.
Really, really pleased to be invited by Geoff. I thought it was a great, well-rounded event because we had some practical insights from some people that are doing it. It's really good.
Beautifully put out. I think the curation of the speakers was good and thoughtful. I loved having a military perspective, not just business people. I thought that was really, really powerful. Shook up their kind of perspectives a little bit. Really good.
We had very different insights from different industries, but the common challenges they all say is the trust. How do we build the trust? How do we keep the trust? And I think that is something that we all have to work on.
I think it would be very beneficial for a lot of organisations to be involved in the event we had today, which was absolutely fantastic.
I think it's good to know that you're not alone and you're able to share those struggles with people and realise that everyone's going through it, and it's great to be able to share. I've spoken to a few of the guest speakers outside of it as well, and they sort of share a similar view, but our environment has changed.
Bijou events like this, 50, 60 people, with leaders who actually have the intelligence, the knowledge and the experience is invaluable. So many events with 200 people is all noise. Here I can actually meet those leaders, I can exchange business cards, exchange ideas, and then drive something that's impactful outside of this.
This was an incredible opportunity actually to again get exposed to a lot of great ideas, insights from research, from practitioners, and an opportunity as well to ask some questions to those experts and practitioners. So I thoroughly enjoyed the event today.
So I think first and foremost, IBM Group, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is intellectual capacity for people to grow. Learning and development is very important to us. So the exchange of perspectives at senior level, you heard from the Colonel, you heard from Sally, you heard from Douglas, and obviously you heard from Julian. At that seniority level, people want to hear their perspectives. And that there's very limited opportunities where you're going to get an audience like that can truly exemplify real life situations in the market. So I think that our annual event, we pride ourselves on bringing the right people to the right audiences. We wanted engaging, because I think engagement is really important. I wrote the Trust Paradigm book last year, and I don't think there's any better time than for each and every one of us to actually be mindful about what trust means. Trust is not a soft word. It's kind of, I've talked about the trust economy. I've talked about the trust bank account, the emotional bank account. That if you do something great, you get a credit. But if you do something negative, you're negative. Now, we're trying to make high growth performance teams within our organizations or respective organizations. We're trying to do that at home as well. So for me, there's no better place than now to start thinking about what does high growth mean to each and every one of us. Attach that to trust. We won't just grow, we'll pivot. And I think that's the starting point.